So, due to the current issues that we're facing worldwide at the moment, here in the UK, the government last week suspended MOT testing for all vehicles whose MOT are due from the 30th of March 2020 onwards for a period of 6 months. Now, this is just my opinion, but personally I think MOT testing is a bit of a dinosaur. A relic from days gone by when vehicles weren't as durable and weren't as well built as they are now. Just going back to my former career, it wasn't unusual to find offences that were covered by an MOT on vehicles that had only been tested recently. At the end of the day, all an MOT certificate proves is that on the day the vehicle was tested, everything was okay. Vehicle condition and roadworthiness is covered by various different road traffic regulations, and most of it, to be honest, is just common sense. But for the moment, MOT testing here in the UK is a fact in law, so we just have to deal with it. Now, you've heard me talk about pre-ride checks in the past, and really what an MOT is a very thorough pre-ride check. An MOT testing station is not allowed to disassemble any part of your motor vehicle in order to inspect it. So you don't need any tools to do this unless something needs fixing or adjusting. Now, as a guide of what to look for, go onto gov.uk and search for MOT. Now, I hasten to add, this does not provide you with a manual on how to actually inspect your motorcycle or car, but it will provide you with a guide of what parts are likely to be inspected and so what parts you need to pay attention to. Like I said earlier, there's no specialist knowledge required for checking these parts, it is just common sense. As the government had made clear during this sort of MOT amnesty, it is the rider or driver's responsibility to ensure that the motor vehicle is roadworthy. Basically, even though you're exempt at the moment under certain conditions from having an MOT on your bike or your car, if there is a defect that would be covered as a failure in an MOT test, you're still liable to prosecution if you get pulled and this is discovered. So for the duration of this suspension, I think that it's sensible, if your bike's MOT has run out, to go through these checks about once a month until everything gets back to normal, both for your own safety and to safeguard you against prosecution if you should get pulled and there's something wrong. Now, we'll go through everything in order as it's laid out on the government's website. Now, part 1 is just an introduction to testing, so you don't need to pay too much attention to that. The list of parts to be checked start at part 2, beginning with the vehicle's lighting. Now, you need to check the conditions of the lights to make sure that they're intact and that the casings of the lighting fixtures are not damaged in any way, that they are clean and that they work properly. Lenses must be the correct colour. Everything must be fitted securely. They would also check to make sure that the angle of your headlight is set properly. Now, in common sense terms, what this means is that you should check your indicators, your tail light, and check that your brake lights operate correctly when you pull or press on the brakes, and that your headlamp functions correctly on both dip and main beam. You should also check for cracks and holes in your light filters. When indicators or tail lights are functioning, they should not emit any white light. They would also check for things like water ingress. We've all seen tail lights half full with water, with algae growing inside. Or on vehicles that are quite old, where the plastic has faded and is no longer its normal intended colour. And once you've done all that and you're happy that everything is as it should be, it's time to move on. And next on the list is to check your steering and your suspension. Check that the suspension operates smoothly and that there's no grinding or clicking, both front and rear. Inspect both your fork stanchions and your rear shock absorbers for any pitting or rust, and check for any suspension fluid leakage. If anything's leaking, it would be an MOT failure. With the bike on its centre stand, you should check for play in the rear swing arm bearings by pushing and pulling the wheel sideways. How much actual play is acceptable is down to an MOT tester's discretion. Play will be detectable by a slight clicking and sideways movement. I would say if there's any play at all, get it checked out. If you're doing these checks alone, sit on the motorcycle, engage your front brake and rock the bike backwards and forwards. And what you're looking for is any play in the bearings on the steering head. Again, this should be detected by a clunking or clicking sound. If you have the assistance of another person, get them to sit on the bike while it's on the centre stand in a way that their weight is on the back of the bike, holding the front wheel up in the air. Any play is probably easier to detect using this method. You should also turn your steering from lock to lock, ensuring that the steering moves smoothly, again checking for any grinding or clicking that might indicate there's a problem with the bearings. And check that all your cables are routed properly, that there are no tight spots that might restrict the steering or interfere with the operation of the bike. Check that your handlebars are securely fastened and are straight, and that your hand grips are free from damage and are not loose in any way. Check that shock fasteners, fork clamps, etc. are all secure. Next up is your wheels and your tyres. Again, this should really be part of your pre-ride checks. Check that your wheels are attached correctly and that there's no loose nuts or bolts. Check that your spokes are intact and that there's no dents or damage to the rims. Check your tyres for damage. The obvious things being cracked sidewalls or bulges in the sidewalls that would indicate there's a problem. Any foreign objects like nails or screws actually in the tyre tread. And also check the tyres for wear. You should have at the very least on the legal limit 1mm tread depth. This is probably a good opportunity to also check your tyre pressures. Obviously, an underinflated or flat tyre would be an MOT failure, and it also gives you a chance to check out the operation of the valves, making sure also that the valve stems are in good condition and are free from corrosion. Next up is the bike's frame or chassis. Check all parts of the frame, especially welds, for signs of cracks or damage. The frame must also be straight and true. Any bent chassis rails caused by impact damage are very likely going to be an MOT failure, bear that in mind. So keep an eye out for any corrosion that might interfere with the braking system or with the steering and suspension. Next up is the braking system. Now at the MOT station, the braking efficiency is tested on rollers via machine, which will measure specific values, something we can't really replicate at home. I think common sense is going to have to prevail here. If you notice any reduction in the efficiency of your brakes while you're riding it, check them out. Other things that you should be looking for is that the brakes engage and release correctly, and that there's no evidence of any brake fluid leakage from brake hoses, unions and calipers. You should also check all visible brake hoses, make sure that there's no obvious deterioration of the materials that they're made from, and that there are no other obvious kinks or damage in the hoses. The exhaust system's next. You need to check that the exhaust system is complete and secure. check for any terminal corrosion, that there's no leaking of exhaust gases while the engine's been operated. So check all the unions and joins in the complete system. The tester will also check the exhaust in operation for excessive noise. Now, they don't use any sort of specialised equipment for this, it's purely down to the tester's discretion. So I'll leave that to your discretion. Next up is the fuel system, and what you're basically checking here is that everything's secure and everything is fuel tight, there are no leaks. As I said earlier, an MOT tester is not permitted to disassemble any of the bike in order to make his inspection. This check will include any visible rust on the fuel tank that may spring a leak, all visible fuel hoses for both condition, cracking, nicks in them, that kind of thing, and to ensure that all the unions are fuel tight. Right, seat and wheel alignment. First off, the seat, of course, for the rider, it should have one, and it should be in good condition and securely fastened. Loose seats are naughty. Now, if you have a pillion seat fitted, you must also have rear foot pegs fitted. A pillion seat with no pillion foot pegs would likely result in an MOT failure. Wheel alignment, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. In case of your front forks, I think you would have to have bent forks for your wheel to be out of alignment, but obviously at the rear, if the chain has been improperly adjusted and the marks on either side not lined up correctly, the rear wheel is likely to be out of alignment and potentially dangerous. You do need to check this. Now, there are certain stipulations for safety of sidecars, but I'm not going to go into that on this video. So the next up is the horn. Obviously the horn must work correctly and it must be suitable for your motor vehicle. Obviously a registration plate must be fitted and your VIN and frame numbers must be intact and legible. As far as your registration plate's concerned, it must be in good condition, it must be clean and easy to read, and it must be the correct one for your motorcycle. Chain and sprockets must be checked for condition, security and adjustment. If your chain is too loose or too tight or is rusted up and shows signs of damage, it could be an MOT failure. And then the final minor things that will be checked are the throttle, the clutch lever and the footrests. Throttle operation must be smooth and again free of any grinding or catching, and it must spring back to its rest position easily. If your throttle sticks open when you let go of it, it would be an MOT failure. The clutch lever will be inspected for damage. It shouldn't be bent, snapped or shortened in any way that makes its operation difficult. An MOT tester, however, would not check the actual clutch mechanism itself. As for your footrests, if you have a pillion seat fitted, it must have rear footrests fitted, and obviously it must have footrests for the rider. They must be free from any damage which would render them unusable, and they must be fitted and working correctly. An MOT tester has no jurisdiction over the operation of the engine, the gearbox or the clutch mechanism. So purely for the purposes of making sure that your bike's roadworthy, you don't need to worry about those. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this is the equivalent to an official MOT test. It's not. I would normally carry out these checks as a pre-MOT check to identify anything that I think the bike might fail on at the actual test, so that I can get the problem rectified, which is going to save me some hassle when I take it to the testing station. But under the current circumstances with the MOT testing suspension, I think it represents the very least that we should be doing to ensure that our bikes are roadworthy. I've not been out much during the lockdown. I think altogether I've been out 3 times, but twice I've seen that a police car has pulled a motorcyclist over. I've got no doubt that they are targeting motorcyclists rather than car drivers to establish exactly what they're doing out during the lockdown. So in my view, you are far more likely to be pulled over and have your bike checked while you're out than if you're in your car. That's just something that you should bear in mind, and I think the crux of carrying out these checks yourself is to be honest with yourself. Don't just dismiss one fault because everything else is okay. An MOT tester certainly wouldn't. And at the end of the day, if you're pulled over, the buck stops with you. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it comes in handy in the coming months and as a pre-MOT check guide in the coming years. Thanks for taking the time to watch my videos and to support my channel. If there are any other aspects of this video that you need clarification on when you're actually checking your bike over, I'm sure that somewhere in my collection of videos that will be a video that will cover it in more detail. All you have to do is search for it and watch all of my videos. I will, as usual, be back on Friday, so until then, if you have to ride, ride safely, and I'll see you soon.